To use the fat quarter function of Mathless Quilts, it's easiest to start with a pattern that's already set up for yardage. So we'll work with the example we've been using. To enable fat quarters, all you have to do is check the Enable Fat Quarters box. This tells Mathless that you're going to be using fat quarters in this design. Now you have a couple of different fat quarter schemes that you can use in your quilt patterns. The first is X blocks per fat quarter. This is basically the one that you want to use if you have a pattern that is basically feature fabric and background, and you want all of the pieces that are going to be in your feature fabric to come from fat quarters and the background to come from yardage. When you have this scheme selected, Mathless is essentially going to fit as many blocks as it can per fat quarter, keeping all of the fat quarter cutting instructions the same. It's going to assume that every fat quarter is getting cut the exact same way, and you're just going to exchange pieces between the blocks. The other fat quarter scheme that you can select is the multi-group scheme. If you have this option selected, you're essentially going to add fat quarters as a fabric type rather than designating which fabrics are going to go on fat quarters. You can assign a color just like you would for a regular fabric. And as you add pieces to your quilt pattern, in the fabric panel, you'll be able to select this fat quarter group through the swatches. This scheme is perfect if you have a bunch of blocks where only one of the fabric types within that block is coming from a fat quarter and the rest is coming from yardage. You can also add as many fat quarter groups as you need. Each fat quarter group will have its own cutting instructions, and it will calculate the total number of fat quarters you need in order to have enough pieces for your design. For this particular example, I'm going to go with the X blocks per fat quarter scheme. In order to use that fat quarter scheme, all I have to do is designate which fabrics I want to come from fat quarters. For this design, it's both A and B. So I'm going to check those fat quarter boxes next to fabrics A and B. That's really all I have to do. I could recalculate now, and Mathless will give me the quantities and cutting instructions for those fat quarters. But I do have the option to check how many blocks I'm going to cut per fat quarter if I want to see and modify that information before I run my calculation. To do that, all I have to do is click the Edit Fat Quarters button. Now I've run this particular pattern before, so it's showing me that I'm going to get 2 blocks per fat quarter. But if this was the very first time it's been run, you would see a big 0 here. And that's not because no blocks per fat quarter could fit, it's just because it hasn't checked yet. In order to check the number of blocks per fat quarter that we can fit, all I have to do is click Check Quantity Fitting. Again, it's telling me that I can fit 2 per fat quarter. That is 2 of each block per fat quarter for a total of 4 blocks, 2 chain and 2 star blocks per fat quarter. If I wanted to change that, I could override by putting whatever number I wanted in there instead. Once I click Save and run my calculation, Mathless would fit 1 of each block per fat quarter. If I decide I want to go back to the maximum that Mathless has already calculated for me, all I have to do is click Reset. Once I'm done editing here, I'll just click Save and then Calculate. Ta-da! Your pattern is now fat quarter friendly. In the fabric requirements table, we've got the total number of fat quarters you need for each side. You'll notice it's lumped both of those fabrics into one fat quarter group. That's just because the pieces that are coming from fat quarters are a combination of both A and B fabrics. In the cutting instructions table, you'll see that the fat quarter groups have their cutting instructions on a per fat quarter basis. Again, that's because it's assuming that you're going to cut every single fat quarter the same and just exchange pieces between them to get a randomized look. This is obviously not the only way that you could use fat quarters in a quilt pattern, but it is the way that works best for readers, which is why that logic is already baked into Mathless. It's never been so easy to write fat quarter friendly patterns.